Hi everyone, welcome to our channel NCERT Science. This video is a continuation of the NCERT Science Class 9 series, and today we will be talking about Chapter 6 in NCERT Science for Class 9, which is tissues. So this is the second chapter in biology, and this is the next unit after cell. It's cell and then tissue. So this was the chapter I was referring to yesterday when I said there are many subdivisions from an organism to a cell. If you didn't watch that video, please go back, watch that video, and come back here when you feel you have mastered that chapter. Alright, so before I start explaining, I would like to mention three things. The first one is that this video will be helpful to those preparing for CBSE exams, NEET and NTSE. Usually it's also for JEE, but JEE doesn't really test biology, so there you go with that. And the second thing is that I encourage you to take your own notes. So this is like the standard speech that I give in every video, and so I have to give it in this video also. I will be presenting in my own words, and I took pictures from the NCERT's textbook that I found online. That's what I'm using to present it, but I recommend you to take your own notes. Make sure you understand what I have presented and write it in your own words, so it becomes easier for you to recollect the concept during your exam. And the third thing is that I intend these videos to be like a last minute revision for like maybe a week or a day before the exam. So I'm covering everything in less than an hour and a half or in 1 hour. Mostly I try to keep it to 1 hour, but it goes to 1 hour 15 minutes, and yesterday's video was 1 hour 20 minutes. So I am going fast. I know I'm going fast. Even I feel I'm going fast. But if you feel so, I recommend you set the speed to 0.75 in the settings thing in YouTube. Alright, so with that aside, let's jump right in and start with Chapter 6, Tissues. So, as I said, this is the second chapter in biology, and this is the unit of an organism after cells. That's the next subdivision. This is Chapter 6, Tissues. So after this we have diversity in living organisms, and that is an interesting chapter. Interesting is all I can say. For those of you who concentrate well, all these chapters will be easy, but if you don't concentrate, all of them will be challenging. Alright, so all this, like in every chapter, is a basic overview of this chapter and a little recap of what we did in the previous chapter. So in this paragraph, I don't see anything popping out that's important. Right, so here, a group of cells that are similar in structure and or function or work together to achieve a particular function forms a tissue. So this is the definition of a tissue, and this is an important definition. This is like the definition of the chapter. Alright, so tissue is a group of cells that are structurally and functionally similar. That is one part of the definition, and the second part is that they perform a particular function. Alright, so these are the two important parts of the definition. First thing is that they are structurally and functionally similar. The second thing is that they perform a particular function together. Alright, Those are the two important clauses, I can say, in this definition, and those are the terms that will earn you points. Alright, so let's compare the structure and functions of tissues. Do plants and animals have the same structure? Do they? No, they don't. Do they both perform similar functions? To an extent, right? Plants and functions, plants and animals breathe, they perform digestion, they perform respiration, there's circulation, there's transport of food and water, and many other such functions. So the basic functions are similar to an extent. Like plants don't have blood circulation, plants don't have a nervous system to think, to conduct messages. So to an extent they have similar functions, but not every function in plants and animals is the same. So there are noticeable differences between the two. Plants are stationary or fixed. They don't move about, they don't have transport to move from one place to another. They stay rooted. Granted, their upper parts sway with the wind or they droop because of lack of water, but that's all because of external forces. And by force I don't just mean pushing or pulling. Forces as in factors. It can be water, it can be wind, it can be the sun, it can be other insects or humans themselves. Unless they are transplanted, plants don't have the tendency to move from one place to another, right? So they're stationary or they're fixed. And since they have to be upright, they have a large quantity of supportive tissue, and supportive tissue generally has dead cells. So this is just like an introduction per se. Animals, on the other hand, move around. So we move around for food, for water, for shelter, to reproduce. We keep moving about, not just humans, every animal. And humans are considered animals in biology. That's something you need to remember. Alright? And they consume more energy as compared to plants, because we move about, but plants don't need to move. That's why animals consume more food and more water, and most of the tissues are living because we have to keep moving. Another difference, so the first difference is movement, and then the second difference between animals and plants is the pattern of growth. The growth in plants is limited to certain regions, while this is not so in animals. So plants, if at a certain time in their lifetime, they only grow vertically. So if this is a seed, if you imagine a plant, not a tree, if you imagine a plant, it's thin but it's long. It's not this seed anymore. It grew by so much. So they have limited growth in certain regions. So right now it's growing only vertically. After it reaches a certain height, it starts developing some plants. I'm not saying every plant. Most plants start developing into trees, where they grow horizontally as well. They form this bark and the brown structure, the bark. That's what they form, and they start growing horizontally. So when they're growing horizontally, there is limited vertical growth, and when they're growing vertically, there is limited horizontal growth. I'm not saying one of them completely stops while the other is occurring. There is limited growth vertically if the plant is growing horizontally, and vice versa. So plants have limited growth, but animals are not. The growth of animals is not limited like plants. Alright. So based on the dividing capacity of tissues, various plant tissues can be classified as growing or meristematic tissue and permanent tissue. So growing tissue is the meristematic tissue, and permanent tissue is the non-growing tissue. Alright. Cell growth in animals is more uniform. So as we're growing tall, we also grow plumpier, we grow healthier, right? So there is no such demarcation of dividing and non-dividing regions in animals. So it's not like one of my fingers grew but the other finger didn't grow. It's been like that since I was born. So typically and generally, the growth of human beings and animals is not cannot be differentiated as into these parts grow and these parts don't grow. We grow uniformly. All right, so pattern of growth is the second point, and then the third point is this organs. So the structural organization of organs and organ systems is far more specialized and localized in complex animals than in very complex plants. So the third point would be complexity. So if you're taking a complex animal, a human being, there are many organs and organ systems. We have the digestive system, the respiratory system, the excretionary system, the nervous system. We have so many systems. But plants, they don't have well-defined systems that are very complex. We have very complex processes in plants. It is complex, but it's not as complex as the organ systems and organs of most animals and human beings. Alright, so complexity, plants are less complex and animals are more complex. Alright, so they're also differently adapted for a sedentary is non-moving existence on one hand. So plants have sedentary existence and animals have active existence, like they move a lot, there is locomotion. That is why there is a difference in organ system design. Alright, so this is like a set of 3 points of 3 differences between the plant and animal tissues, and we have 2 questions that we covered in this that we covered so far. If you are not able to answer a question, go back to where I explained it. Make sure you understand it and come back and answer the question. Once you answer the question, it is time for us to move on. Alright, so we're starting with plant tissues. So the first tissue would be the meristematic tissue, and there is an experiment that you can perform at home, can be performed at home. They're all pretty easy to obtain, the material for the experiment, so this can be done at home. So the growth of plants occurs only in certain specific regions, like we talked about previously. In the growth of a pattern of growth point, there is limited growth in specific regions for plants, but that's not how it is for animals, but that is how it is for plants. Alright, this is because the dividing tissue, also known as the meristematic tissue, is located only at these points. Which points? The points where we observe growth in this experiment. Alright, so meristematic tissue. So one thing we have from this is that the meristematic tissue is the growing tissue, a tissue which supports and causes, I can say, growth in plants. Alright, that is the meristematic tissue. And depending on the region where meristematic tissue, are present, meristematic tissues are classified as apical, lateral, and intercalary. So new cells are produced by the meristem, and they're initially like those of the meristem itself, but as they grow and mature, their characteristics slowly change and they become differentiated as components of other tissues. Alright, so that's the case with all living organisms. Even humans, if you consider, the 2 newborn babies, let's say a boy and a girl, they look similar in their infancy, but as they grow, they start showing characteristics that are specific to their gender only, right? They show some show characteristics of males and some show characteristics of females, and that's what makes us differentiate between males and females. Alright, so apical meristem is present at the growing tips of stems and roots and increases the length of the stem and the roots. So this is the apical meristem. It's present at the tip of the plant. Alright, so if you're talking about a plant that's growing from a seed, it's growing vertically because of active apical meristem. Alright, and the girth of the stem or the root increases due to lateral meristem, also known as the cambium, and girth is the width or how wide it is. Alright, so that is increased by the lateral meristem, and it's commonly seen as cambium. You're probably familiar with this. Rather than lateral meristem, we usually hear cambium more often. Alright, and intercalary meristem is seen in some plants, and it is located near the nodes of the plants. Alright, so this is where intercalary meristem is present. So apical meristem is present at the tips of the plants, which causes vertical growth vertically. It causes an increase in the length, and lateral meristem, also known as cambium, causes growth in the width of the plant, and the intercalary meristem is present near the nodes of the plant. Alright, so the cells of the meristematic tissue are very active because they have to keep dividing. The cells of the you have to understand and relate that meristematic tissue is the tissue that causes growth in plants. So it has to be dividing a lot, right? And if it's dividing a lot, it means that it's very active. So they have a dense cytoplasm, and they have thin cellulose walls, and they have a prominent nucleus. Alright, they lack vacuoles, and this is a question here that asks us, do you know why they lack vacuoles? So you have to refer to the functions of vacuoles in the chapter on cells. I am not going to give you the answer because I want you to do your own fair share of research and come up with the answer on your own. Alright, so permanent tissue. What happens to the cells formed by the meristematic tissue? So they take up a specific role, and they lose their ability to divide. As a result, they form a permanent tissue, and this process of taking up a permanent shape, size, and function is called differentiation. Alright, so most of these concepts you can relate with human beings. So whenever I find anything relatable, I'm just going to I will tell you what I find common about that with human beings. So in this case, differentiation is the process of meristematic tissues turning into permanent tissues by taking up a permanent shape, size, and a function. So it's like when you're in school, like right now, you take a variety of subjects. You have science, you have social, you have math, you have economics, and languages, English, and all of that. But as you move to college, you will reduce the number of subjects to either MPC or BIPC, MEC, CEC. So you have a specific, maybe less than 5 or 6 subjects from 10 subjects. You have like 6 or 5 subjects now because you want to concentrate more on your goal, on what you want to do later in life, right? So that's and then as you move on to after 12th grade, you study only 1 or 2 subjects, and you have deeper understanding of that subject. Like if you want to take NEET, you do only physics, chemistry, and biology, and you do in-depth study of those 3. If you want to become an engineer, you do only math, physics, and chemistry, and you do an in-depth study of that. That is because you want to focus on the function of your career, right? There is no point in there is a point, but it's not very helpful if you know all parts of an animal if you're going to be doing any engineering, right? So you start focusing more on the function, And that is exactly what happens with plants. Meristematic tissues grow and then they take up a specific function, which is why they lose their ability to divide and they become permanent tissues. Alright, and then we have an activity here, and this has to be done at school with the help of a teacher. So then we're talking about the types of permanent tissues. Alright, so a few layers of cells beneath the epidermis are generally simple permanent tissue. The first one is simple permanent tissue, and it's usually present beneath the epidermis. Okay, it's the first few layers beneath the epidermis. That's the simple permanent tissue. It consists of relatively unspecialized cells within the thin cell walls. So unspecialized is like your 11th 12th grade stage, right? So you're neither taking 10 subjects nor taking just 2 or 3 subjects. You're taking like 5 or 6 subjects where you're relatively unspecialized, but compared to school you have lesser subjects, so you're concentrating more on the selected 5 or 6 subjects that you took. Alright, so this is before it turns completely into a permanent tissue. The meristematic tissue has a stage of relatively unspecified cells, and that is the simple permanent tissue, which is present as the first few layers beneath the epidermis. So they're usually loosely arranged, and that's why large spaces between these cells are found, and these spaces are called intercellular spaces. This is not to be confused with the interstitial spaces, interatomic spaces, and the intermolecular spaces that I explained in chemistry. This is the intercellular spaces, which are the spaces between the cells of a tissue. Alright, and this tissue generally stores food. That's its function before it moves on to take a more specific function. It stops as a simple permanent tissue and stores food. In some situations, it contains chlorophyll and performs photosynthesis, and it's called Chlorenchyma. And in aquatic plants, large air cavities are present in the parenchyma to help them float. Such a parenchyma is called aerenchyma. Aerenchyma, one way to remember this is air. That's how it sounds, right? Aerenchyma has air in it. Alright, that's not the spelling, but it sounds the same. That's how I remember it. Alright, aerenchyma has air, and it helps that part of the parenchyma to float in water. So it's usually found a lot in aquatic plants. The flexibility in plants is due to another permanent tissue called Chlorenchyma. So there is when I was doing tissues this chapter, I kept getting confused between Chlorenchyma and Chlorenchyma. Okay, so whenever my teacher said these two, they always sounded the same, and I always kept getting confused. But Chlorenchyma has chlorophyll, this part of the word, chlorophyll, and Chlorenchyma does not have chlorophyll. Alright, so what is the function of Chlorenchyma? It allows flexibility to the plant. Alright, flexibility. Alright, so it allows the bending of various parts of a plant like tendrils and stems of climbers without breaking. So if you have a creeper like money plant, the way the plant bends and moves in a direction, that is because of Chlorenchyma. And this tissue is present in the leaf stalks below the epidermis. The cells of this tissue are living, elongated, and irregularly thickened at the corners. Alright, so I'm going to attempt to draw this. It's elongated and it's irregularly thickened at the corners. Alright, this is supposed to be irregular, but I feel it looks more like a dog bone, but let's move on. Okay, so these are the various types of simple tissues. This is parenchyma. and then this is Chlorenchyma. I'm just gonna put a dot, Chlorenchyma. The second one is Sclerenchyma. So that's what we're going to talk about now. It doesn't have an H. Alright. Okay, so the second and the third and fourth ones are Sclerenchyma. Is just two different ways of representing that they showed here. So another type of permanent tissue is called Sclerenchyma. It's the tissue which makes the plant hard and stiff. So if a tissue makes the plant hard, it is supposed to be dead, okay? Because it gives that rigidity once it's dead. So we've seen the husk of a coconut. It's made up of sclerenchymatous tissue. That is a complicated word, but sclerenchymatous just means sclerenchyma, alright? A tissue which shows the properties of sclerenchyma, which happens to be the sclerenchyma tissue, alright? So the cells of this tissue are dead, like I said, and they are long and narrow, and the walls are thickened due to the presence of lignin. Lignin is the substance. If you see here, it's long and narrow. This space is known as the lumen. The empty space is the lumen, the one that I'm shading in blue here, and it has thick lignified walls, alright? So these walls are often so thick that there is no internal space inside the cell. So sometimes these walls are so thick that there isn't any space for the blue shaded region to be present, right? That's what happens in most plants because they have very thick walls. This is to support the plant and give it the stiffness or the hardness. That's why it's good if the Sclerenchyma has very thick walls. Alright, so this tissue is present in stems, around vascular bundles, and in the veins of leaves, and in the hard covering of seeds and nuts. It provides strength to plant parts, alright? So one way to remember all this is just to imagine common hard parts of a plant, right? The stem of a plant is hard. You can't pinch it and expect it to break. It is hard. Around the vascular bundles, the plant is hard. In the veins of leaves, you can pinch the veins of leaves very easily. That is an indication that Sclerenchyma is present. And the hard covering of seeds and nuts. So the covering of a walnut has Sclerenchyma. Pistachio has Sclerenchyma. That's what they mean. You can't expect it to break easily because the function of Sclerenchyma is to provide strength and support. An indication of the presence of Sclerenchyma would be the difficulty to break that part of a plant easily, right? Wait, the sentence was framed wrong. The difficulty to break the plant easily. That's an indication of the Sclerenchyma. The presence of Sclerenchyma. So what you observe is the outermost layer of cells. It's called the epidermis. So I've been saying that parenchyma is present as simple permanent tissue is present as the first few layers below the epidermis. So what is the epidermis? It's the outermost layer of cells. So simple permanent tissue is present as the first few layers of the epidermis, which is the outermost layer of cells. Alright, epidermis is like human skin. We say we go to a dermatologist for any skin related issues. Dermis means skin. Epidermis for plants is like the skin to humans. Alright, the epidermis is usually made up of a single layer of cells, and in some plants that live in dry habitats, the epidermis may be thicker since they need protection against water loss. Alright, so that's why cacti have thicker and waxy surface to prevent the loss of water, alright, because they hardly have enough water for themselves, and if that water is lost through transpiration, it's going to be very hard for them. So that can be asked as a give reason questions. Cacti have thicker and waxy epidermis. Give reason. They have thicker and waxy epidermis to prevent the loss of water. Alright. So epidermal cells on the aerial parts of a plant often secrete a waxy, water-resistant layer on their outer surface, and this aids in the protection against loss of water, mechanical injury, and invasion by parasitic fungi. Since it has a protective role to play, cells of epidermal tissue form a continuous layer without intercellular spaces, and most epidermal cells are relatively flat. So it leaves room for the rest of the cells. It doesn't want to cover the whole structure of the plant, just like our skin. There's only a thin layer of our skin. The rest of it is covered by muscle, bone, and blood, and all of that. Similarly, the epidermis of plants is very thin, and so they're relatively flat. Often their outer and side walls are thicker than their inner wall. This is a point that is beneficial to keep in mind. Alright, so we observe small pores here and there in the epidermis of a leaf, and these pores are called stomata. The singular form of stomata is stoma, and like I differentiated yesterday, I took time to differentiate between stoma and stroma. Stoma is the singular form of stomata, which are the tiny pores that are found on the underside of leaves. Stroma with the R is the fluid, semi-fluid, I can say, semi-fluid, gel-like structure, or it's a semi-fluid component in a chloroplast. Alright, that is where chlorophyll is present. It's like the cytoplasm of chloroplast. So it's the matrix, semi-liquid matrix in chloroplast, that is stroma, that has the R. Stoma without the R is, did I just say stomato? I meant stomata. Alright. So stoma without the R is the singular form of stomata, which is the tiny pores that are present on the underside of leaves. So stomata are enclosed by two kidney-shaped cells called guard cells. So this is the diagram that they show here. Guard cells are these kidney-shaped, like think of rajma, the kidney beans. That's how guard cells are. Alright, so these are the guard cells. They're like a pair of kidney-shaped cells, alright, and they are necessary for exchanging gases with the atmosphere. Transpiration also takes place through the stomata. Transpiration, the definition would be the loss of water from the aerial parts of the plant. So a more concise definition for transpiration would be loss of water in the form of water vapor, through the aerial parts of the plant. Alright, that would be a more concise definition of transpiration. Right, transpiration. Okay, so the guard cells, they are responsible for the exchange of gases between the inside of the plant and the atmosphere, and this takes place, and there is this complex, relatively complex process that is that occurs to facilitate the movement of gases, exchange of gases between the plant and the atmosphere. So the epidermal cells of roots, whose function is water absorption, commonly bear long hair-like parts that generally increase the total absorptive surface area. So that increases the efficiency of absorption. In some plants like desert plants, epidermis has a thick waxy coating of cutin. That's a chemical substance with waterproof quality. That's what we see on the leaves of lotuses. That's what we see on cacti. And can we think of a reason for this? I mentioned it previously in the video. If you can't recall it, go back to the video and watch it again. Once you know you have the answer, come back here again, okay? So, is the outer layer of a branch of a tree different from the outer layer of a young stem? This is something I want you to think about. I will let you think about it because I have made it pretty obvious in the explanation previously. And if you're unable to recall it again, just go back and watch wherever I explain that. As plants grow older, the outer protective tissue undergoes certain changes. A strip of secondary meristem located in the cortex forms layers of cells which constitute the cork. That's like hardened dead cell, alright? Cells of cork are dead and compactly arranged without intercellular spaces. They don't have any spaces between them. They are compactly arranged, and they also have a substance called suberin in their walls that makes them impervious to gases and water. Alright, so cork has a substance called suberin which makes them impervious to gases and water. Alright, I had to pause the video to go get water. Alright, so as I was saying, cork has the substance called suberin which makes it impervious to gases and water. And with that we finish simple permanent tissue. Then we have complex permanent tissue, in which so like simple permanent tissue had parenchyma. So this is like a recap of what we did: parenchyma, chlorenchyma, and sclerenchyma. And parenchyma, if it has chlorophyll, is called chlorenchyma, and if it has air in it, is called aerenchyma. Alright, so that is simple permanent tissue. And then we move on to complex permanent tissue. I'm just going to get rid of this because I need to write about complex permanent tissue over here mostly. Okay, so complex permanent tissue is the different types of tissue that we so different types of tissues that we have discussed until now are all made up of one type of cells which look like each other. Alright, such tissues are called simple permanent tissue, and another type of permanent tissue is the complex tissue. So complex tissue is divided into, can be classified as xylem and phloem. Alright, xylem is that part of the plant which transports food, and phloem transports water. Alright, so that's like the ultimate difference between xylem and phloem. Xylem transports food while phloem transports water. Alright, so xylem and phloem are both examples of complex tissues, and together they constitute the vascular bundle. Alright, so that was what I was talking about previously. Vascular bundle has xylem and phloem together. Alright, and a vascular tissue is a distinctive feature of complex plants, one that has made possible their survival in the terrestrial environment. So an indication that a plant is complex is the presence of a vascular tissue, and a vascular tissue has xylem and phloem existing together. Alright, so xylem consists of tracheids, vessels, xylem parenchyma, and I would like to add that it also has the xylem sclerenchyma. This will be helpful for competitive exams like NTSE and NEET. Xylem sclerenchyma is also known as wood fibers. Alright, wood fibers. So and xylem fibers. Oh, so they did mention. Never mind. So nope, yeah. So xylem fibers or wood fibers is xylem sclerenchyma. Alright. Tracheids and vessels are tubular structures. They're present like tubes. Here you have the diagrams of tracheids and vessels. They're tubular structures. They're structurally similar to tubes, and this allows them to transport water and minerals vertically from the roots, that is where water absorption takes place, and throughout the plant in a vertical manner to the topmost leaf or flower or whatever there is. Alright, and the parenchyma stores food. Alright, parenchyma is a simple permanent tissue, and the function of simple permanent tissues is to store food. That is why the parenchyma stores food. And xylem fibers are mainly supportive because sclerenchyma are dead cells, and dead cells provide support. Right? That is why I want you to make these connections, because it's going to make it easier for you to relate to the functions and remember the functions easier. Alright, so I'm going to get rid of this. Xylem fibers is the sclerenchyma. Alright, so phloem is made up of 5 types of cells. Xylem is made up of 4, phloem is made up of 5. The sieve cells, sieve tubes, companion cells, phloem fibers, and phloem parenchyma. Phloem fibers again here refers to sclerenchyma. Phloem, I'm just going to say phloem, and xylem fibers are the sclerenchyma, refer to sclerenchyma. And sieve tubes are tubular cells with perforated walls. Perforated means with holes. So it's like the net with which you filter the cream from the milk, or you filter ginger from tea. This straining device, if you picture what I mean to draw, it's like a very bad representation, but you pour water or tea through it, and then you have this glass that collects the tea, but then there's ginger present here. So that perforation, those holes in there, that's called perforation. And sieve tubes have perforated walls through which it transports food from leaves to other parts of the plant. Wow, I meant the opposite. I apologize. There was something wrong with my mind. So xylem transports food. No, I'm making the same mistake again. Xylem transports water, and phloem transports food. Yep, got it right now. Xylem transports water, phloem transports food. Xylem transports water, phloem transports food. I'm going to say that to myself. You say that to yourself also. I apologize for that. So phloem transports food from leaves to other parts of the plant, and except phloem fibers, other phloem cells are all living cells. So sieve tubes, sieve cells, companion cells, and parenchyma, they're all living, and sclerenchyma is the only dead cell. Alright, so there are 4 questions here. Again, I need you to try them on your own. If you didn't understand, or if you're not able to answer one of those, you may go back and listen to the explanation of that part. Alright, so animal tissues. This is again just an introduction. All this is introduction. So the first type of animal tissue is epithelial tissue, and it's the covering or the protective tissue in an animal body. Those are the epithelial tissues. They're like the epithelial tissues of animals are equal to the epidermal cells of plants, right? So it's similar in function. I'm not saying they're the same. I'm just going to say similar. Bringing in math again, but they're similar. They're not the same. Epithelium covers most organs and cavities within the body. It also forms a barrier to keep different systems separate. So you can't have that continuity because each system has a different function. It keeps those organ systems separate. Epithelial tissue keeps the different organ systems separate. The skin, the lining of the mouth, the lining of blood vessels, lung alveoli, and kidney tubules are all made up of epithelial tissue. So there's this common misconception that epithelial tissue is the skin. But no, the skin has a type of epithelial tissue, alright? It's made up of a type of epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue cells are tightly packed and they form a continuous sheet. Why? Because they have to serve as a barrier and they have to keep the different organ systems separate. They have to be together. They shouldn't have any gaps. That's why they're tightly packed and they form a continuous sheet. When you start making the connections, you will remember things better. They have only a small amount of cementing material between them and almost no intercellular spaces. Obviously, anything entering or leaving the body must cross at least one layer of the epithelium because most of our body has the skin, right? And the epithelial tissue, a kind of epithelial tissue is the skin. So it must cross at least one layer of epithelium, and as a result, the permeability of cells of various epithelia, that's the plural of epithelium, play an important role in regulating the exchange of materials between the body and the external environment, and also between different parts of the body. Alright, and regardless of the type, all epithelia are usually separated from the underlying tissue by an extracellular fibrous basement membrane. Alright, so different epithelia showing different structures that correlate with their unique different epithelia show differing structures that correlate with their unique functions. So if one tissue has to perform a specific function, it will have a structure that is that helps that tissue perform its function. And if there is another epithelial tissue with a different function, it will have a different structure that will help it perform its own function. So like if you have a neuron and if you have a bone, the main function of a neuron is to conduct messages between the body. That's why it's long. And a bone is the primary function of a bone is to provide support and a framework to the body, which is why it's rigid. There's no point in neurons being rigid and bones being long. Each cell, and just like a neuron and bone have different structures based on their functions, different epithelia have different structures based on their functions. Alright, so for example, in cells lining blood vessels or lung alveoli, where transportation of substance occurs through a selectively permeable membrane, there is a simple flat kind of epithelium which is known as the simple squamous epithelium. Squama means scale. Alright, so this is why squamous epithelium is like this flat layer of epithelium through which most transportation occurs through a selectively permeable membrane. Simple squamous epithelial cells are extremely thin and flat, and they form a delicate lining. The esophagus and the lining of the mouth are also covered with squamous epithelium. The skin, which covers the body, is also made up of squamous epithelium. They are present in many layers to prevent wear and tear. So if you have a skin scrape, that scrape goes through many layers of skin, because you can't have ridiculously insignificant stimuli tearing through your skin and exposing your body fluids or your blood, muscle, bone, whatever it is. That's why they have many layers. They're relatively flat, but they do have many layers. All right. It's known so they're arranged in patterns of layers called the stratified squamous epithelium system. So epithelium. So squamous epithelium has simple squamous epithelium and stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified. All right. And where the absorption and secretion occur in the inner lining of intestine and other such places, tall epithelial cells are present, and because they're tall, because they're pillar-like, they're called columnar epithelial tissues. All right. In the respiratory tract, columnar epithelial tissue also has cilia. Cilia are fine hair-like structures. So if this is the columnar epithelial tissue, it has these very thin and fine hair-like structures. All right. And these cilia can move. Their movement pushes the mucus forward to clear it, and this type of epithelium is the ciliated columnar epithelial tissue. Cuboidal epithelium with cube-shaped cells forms the lining of kidney, tubules, and ducts of salivary glands, where it provides mechanical support. So the function of cuboidal epithelium is to provide mechanical support. Epithelial cells often acquire additional specialization as gland cells, where they secrete substances. Alright, so gland cells secrete substances. So sometimes a portion of epithelial tissue folds inward, like so, like that. So if it was like supposed to be like this is how it's going to be. It folds inwards. And a multicellular gland is formed, and this is known as glandular epithelium. So glandular epithelium is a type of cuboidal epithelium. Alright, glandular. And ciliated columnar epithelium is a subdivision of columnar epithelial tissue. And then we move on to the connective tissue. So the first type of tissue that we discussed was the epithelial tissue, and now we're talking about the connective tissue. Blood is a type of connective tissue, and why would it be called a connective tissue? Alright, so a clue is provided in the introduction of this chapter. Go back there, read it, and see if you can answer it. Let's look at this type of tissue in some more detail. Alright, so in the introduction they just give a brief overview. Now we're going to look at it in detail. So the cells of connective tissue are loosely spaced and embedded in an intercellular matrix. The matrix may be jelly-like, fluid, dense, or rigid. That is determined based on the function and the location of that tissue. And the nature of matrix differs in concordance with the function of that particular connective tissue. Right. So then we have an activity here. This is an activity that involves the use of microscope, so don't try it at home. Unless you have a microscope at home, then I can't say anything. Alright, so blood has a fluid matrix called plasma, in which red blood cells and white blood cells and platelets are suspended. So plasma, you might have heard a lot these days with frequent mention of plasma donations and plasma transfers for COVID-19 as a treatment for COVID-19. So I hope you're all familiar with the word plasma. It's this fluid-like matrix that's present in blood. It consists of, plasma consists of plasma consists of RBCs, that's red blood red blood corpuscles, white blood corpuscles, and platelets. Alright. So the plasma contains proteins, salt, and hormones also. Proteins, salts, and hormones. In addition to the RBCs, WBCs, and platelets. Alright. Blood flows and transports gases. So these are the different functions. Digests food, transports gases, it transports digested food, it transports hormones, and it transports waste material to different parts of the body. Alright. So bone is another type of connective tissue because it connects the different parts of the body. It forms a framework or a skeletal structure or a framework that supports the body. It also anchors the muscles and supports the main organs of the body. That is why it's called connective tissue. It's a strong and non-flexible tissue. We can't hold two sides of a bone and pull it and expect it to expand like a rubber band, right? So what would be the advantage of these properties for bone functions? It will provide rigidity and strength to the body, which is its primary function, right? So bone cells are embedded in a hard matrix that is composed of calcium and phosphorus compounds. That is what makes it strong and non-flexible. Alright. So two bones can be connected to each other by a type of connective tissue called the ligament. This is very elastic. Alright. And it has considerable strength. It's not as strong as bones itself, but it's not very weak that is insignificant either. It has considerable strength and it is very elastic. Ligaments contain very little matrix and they connect bones to bones. Tendons are another type which connect muscles to bones. So how I remember which is I remember LBB, TMB. I don't see any obvious trick popping right up on my face, but when I was doing this chapter in 9th grade, I just kept saying LBBTMB to myself. So ligament connects bone to bone, tendon connects muscle to bone, right? That is how I remembered it. Tendons are fibrous tissues with great strength. So ligaments have considerable strength, but tendons have great strength, but they have limited flexibility. Ligaments are very elastic. They have a lot of flexibility, but tendons have limited flexibility. Alright. Another type of connective tissue is called the cartilage, which has widely spaced cells. The solid matrix, it has a solid matrix. Alright. And this matrix is composed of proteins and sugars. Cartilage smoothens bones, surfaces, and joints. It's also present in the nose, the ear, the trachea, and the larynx. So the trachea and the larynx are present in the throat. That's they're present in the throat. Alright. So the nose, when you touch the tip of your nose, you can feel your nose going in, right? Just the tip of your nose, gently press it, you will feel it going in to a certain extent. That is because of the presence of cartilage. But if you take the bone, the part that is closer to your eyes, and you apply the same force, the same gentle force, you won't see that going in. That's because the part of your nose which is closer to your eyes is made up of bone, like the hard structure. But the tip of your nose is made up of cartilage, which causes your nose to go inwards even if you apply little pressure. Similarly, touch the tips of your ear and apply gentle force. You will also see that your ear is moving to a certain extent. That is also because of the presence of cartilage. So we can fold the cartilage of the ears, but we cannot bend the bones in our arms. So if you do the same thing to your arms, the same gentle force, your arms are not going to go inside, right? That is because arms have bones and ears and the nose have cartilages. Alright. So areolar connective tissue is found between the skin and muscles, around blood vessels and nerves, and in the bone marrow. It fills the space inside the organs, supports internal organs, and helps in the repair of tissues. And fat storing adipose tissues are found below the skin and between internal organs. The cells of this tissue are filled with fat globules. Storage of fats also lets it act as an insulator, that it regulates body temperature. That's another way of saying insulator. If you have trouble remembering the word insulator, you can say it regulates body temperature or it controls body temperature. Alright. So the whole lesson has many functions, many locations, and there are many specific things that you need to remember. And constant practice is the only way that you can do this. Alright, constant practice, smart learning, and you'll do it. Alright, so muscular tissue consists of elongated cells, also known as muscle fibers, and this tissue is responsible for movement in our body. Alright, muscles help our body move. They contain special proteins called contractile proteins, which contract and relax to cause movement. So there are three types of muscular tissues: striated, smooth, and cardiac muscles. Striated muscles, smooth muscles, and cardiac muscles. Alright, so we can move some muscles by conscious will. So like if you want to walk, you can consciously move your legs, right? So that is a conscious movement of muscles. But the breathing processes like breathing, so like your lungs move in and out, they expand and contract, that is involuntary. That is controllable to a certain extent, that is true, but once you stop thinking about it, you don't stop breathing, right? It keeps going on involuntarily. Those are involuntary functions. And cardiac and the pumping of your heart is controlled by cardiac muscles, which is definitely purely involuntary. Even with control, you cannot stop your heartbeat. You can consciously control your breathing, you can consciously control blinking, but you cannot consciously control your heartbeat. Alright, so voluntary actions are controlled by skeletal muscles, which are also known as striated muscles. Involuntary functions, which are controllable by conscious effort, are controlled by smooth muscles. And the heartbeat, just the heartbeat, exclusively the heartbeat, is controlled by cardiac muscles. Cardiac is related to heart, so that's what the best way of remembering this. So the cells of striated tissues are light. They have light and dark bands or striations. That's why they're called striated when they're stained appropriately, and as a result they're also called striated because they have striations. The cells of these tissues are long, cylindrical, unbranched, and multinucleate. They have many nuclei. So the movement of food in the alimentary canal or the contraction and relaxation of blood vessels, they're involuntary movements. We cannot start or stop them simply by wanting to do so. Smooth and such involuntary functions are taken care of by smooth muscles, which are the involuntary muscles. Alright, they control involuntary functions. They are found in the iris of the eye, the dilation and contraction of the pupil. They are present in the uterus. They are present in the bronchi of the lungs, that helps your respiration. And all these cells are long. They are long with pointed ends. They're spindle shaped. So this is how they are, right? So they have a spindle shape, and they're long with pointed ends. They're uninuclear. They only have one nucleus. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the center, but I just like drawing the nucleus in the center. Alright, so they're also known as unstriated. And why would they be called that? Because they don't have the striations between the long and dark striations. They don't, smooth muscles don't have that. That's why they're also known as striated muscles. So skeletal muscles, also known as striated muscles, control the voluntary actions. Smooth muscles, also known as unstratified muscles, control involuntary actions. And then we have the cardiac muscles that are cylindrical, branched, and uninucleate that control the heartbeat. Those are cardiac muscles. Alright, and then we have nervous tissue. Nervous tissue, the basic unit of nervous tissue is neurons, and we talked about neurons yesterday in the previous chapter. That I just briefly mentioned it to have this star-shaped structure, nucleus, branches. This is not my best diagram either. And then it has the axon here with the myelin sheath, and then it has the terminal branches, right? So this is the neuron, which is the basic structure of the nervous tissue. It is in charge of relaying messages. It is in charge of the communication between different parts of the body, and it helps the body respond to internal and external stimuli. So this is the cell body, the nucleus, the dendrites, which are the branch-like structures. This is the axon, and these are the nerve or endings or the terminal branches. Alright, so the cells in these tissues are called neurons, and a neuron consists of a cell body with a nucleus and cytoplasm, from which long, thin, hair-like parts called the dendrites arise. Each neuron has a single long process as in a part, called the axon, and many short branched parts called the dendrites, right? An individual cell may be up to a meter long. That's how long they may be, alright? Can be more or less, but they're typically about a meter long. And many nerve fibers found together by connective tissue make up a nerve, alright? Bound together. I don't know, I think I said found together, but I meant bound together. Alright, so the signal that passes along the nerve cell is called a nerve impulse. So it's like an electric signal, and it's called an impulse. And these impulses allow us to move our muscles when we want to. They allow us to blink when we want to. They allow us to breathe when we want to. So the conscious functions that we do is because of the neural impulses that neurons initiate. Alright, and the functional combination of nerve and muscle is fundamental to most animals, because the nerve initiates the command to walk or to move our limbs, and the muscles present in those limbs initiate the movement. So a combination of neurons and the nervous tissue and the muscular tissue causes movement in animals, which is very important for survival. Alright, so this combination enables animals to move rapidly in response to stimuli. If there is a hot object, we move away from it, like if it's really hot, or if there is rain, if we don't want to get sick, we move away from it. Those are stimuli, and a combination of the nervous tissue and the muscular tissue causes movement, which helps in the survival of animals. Alright, so these are the 4 questions again that I want you to answer on your own. As always, if you have any question, go back to the part of the lesson in which I explained that. And that ends our lesson. So we have the recap points that you can go over the day of your exam or the night before your exam. And once you feel confident with the whole lesson, come over to the exercises and solve them. If you are unable to solve any question, feel free to go back to that part of the lesson in which I explained the concept. Alright, and then once you're done with the exercises, you are good to go. But before I finish this lesson, I just wanted to go over the recap points to recap with you. If I ever zoom out of this, I will be able to start that. Yep. Alright, so first we did the introduction of tissues. This is the wrong thickness. Alright, so first we did the introduction, and then we went over the differences between plant tissues and animal tissues in terms of movement. Plant tissues are sedentary, they don't move, while plants don't move, not plant tissues, and animals move. So with regard to movement, we talked about the difference. With regard to the pattern of growth, we talked about the difference. Plants have limited growth, and their growth is limited to certain parts of the plant, while animals have uniform growth, typically. And then there's complexity, where we talked that plants are less complex than animals. And then we talked about plant tissues. So the first thing we talked about in plant tissues was meristematic tissue. Something wrong there. So meristematic tissue, we talked about apical meristem, lateral meristem, and I forgot to mention intercalary meristem. Apical meristem is present at the top of the plant, at the apex or the topmost part. It is in charge of longitudinal or vertical growth. Lateral meristem is in charge of growth widthwise, and intercalary meristem is present in the nodes of the plant. Then we talked about permanent tissue. So meristematic tissue is the dividing tissue. Permanent tissue is the non-dividing tissue. The permanent tissue is the meristematic tissue that took on more specific functions, and there are different permanent tissues. Nope, doesn't want to move. Alright, I apologize for that. I keep moving the wrong thing. Alright, so the permanent tissue is of two types: simple permanent, complex permanent. Simple permanent has parenchyma, chlorenchyma, and sclerenchyma. Parenchyma again is divided into chlorenchyma and erenchyma. And then we talked about guard cells, which control the movement of stomata, and therefore facilitate the exchange of gases. And then we talked about epidermal cells, which are the outermost cells of the plant. And then we talked about complex permanent tissues, which has the xylem and the phloem, which together constitute the vascular bundle. Alright. So tracheids and vessels are present in the xylem, sieve tubes, sieve plates, and companion cells. And companion cells are present in the phloem, companion cells, and parenchyma and sclerenchyma are present in both the xylem and the phloem. Parenchyma is for food storage of food, while sclerenchyma is useful for support and strength. Alright, and then we talked about animal tissues. See, I keep moving the wrong thing. I don't know when I learned. Alright, so animal tissues, we have the epithelial tissue. in which we talked about the squamous, the simple squamous epithelial tissue, and the stratified squamous epithelial tissue. Stratified is a part of it. Stratified, and then we talked about cuboidal, in which we saw the occurrence of glandular tissues when the epithelium curves inwards. We talked about columnar tissue, in which it's called the ciliated columnar tissue if it has hair-like projections, usually present in the esophagus, we said. And then there's the connective tissue, which has the blood, the bone, cartilage, areolar tissue, adipose tissue, tendon, and ligament. We talked about TMB, LBB. Alright, that's B. I guess it looks like G, but that's B. Tendons connect muscles to bones, and ligaments connect bones to bones. And then we have the muscular tissue, the striated, smooth, and cardiac tissues. Striated control voluntary actions, smooth control involuntary actions, and the cardiac tissues control heartbeat. Alright, and then we talked about the nervous tissue, in which the basic unit is the neuron, and then we saw how a combination of the nervous tissue plus the muscular tissue causes movement in animals, which leads to their survival. And on that note, we ended the lesson, and that is a very quick recap of what we did in the whole video. So I hope this video helped you understand the concept better, and head on to the next video, which will cover chapter 7 of NCERT Science for class 9, diversity in living organisms. As I said in the beginning of the lesson, I personally call this lesson interesting because there's a lot to learn and a lot to concentrate on, and so yeah, that we will worry about when the time comes. So don't forget that you can do this, and have a great rest of your day. And also don't forget to like and share this video, subscribe to our channel for more content. Rock your exam. All the very best. Bye bye.